SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air for over 25 jellyfishing years. And with all this time, the creators are bound to make at least a few changes to the animation style here and there. Whether it be adding a few holes to SpongeBob, or even a complete change to the entire art style. So today, I wanted to go over every time SpongeBob changes its animation style, from the pilot all the way to 3D animated SpongeBob. But before we get to that, let's go from the earliest versions of SpongeBob and then work our way back to some of the freaky ones. In the beginning, it used the cell art style, a style where artists drew and painted on transparent sheets and layered them over the backgrounds. Although, despite what many people thought, this wasn't the traditional way cell styles were made. SpongeBob was actually made using digital apps such as Toons, back then called US Animation, to replicate the cell style by making the colors slightly softer and duller, making them look like someone took crayons and sketched out a sponge with a face. They did this so the animation process could be easier and quicker, because instead of drawing on paper, then transferring the transparent sheets and hand painting them, they could just draw it and let the software replicate it for them. It was also 1999, aka ancient Rome, and studios like Disney were moving out of the traditional cell style, making it overall outdated. But this next change is straight up disgusting, vile, and weird. You'll be watching a normal SpongeBob scene, and then out of nowhere, bam, you'll get hit with one of these absolutely vile close-up shots. Like, every single hair, sweat drop is suddenly in your sight of view. It can happen while you're eating too, and literally, SpongeBob has gotten complaints about this in the past. They usually happen when something intense is going on, like when SpongeBob gets a splinter, or when he's crying so hard that his face warps. And the close-up just makes it look so much worse than it has to. The detail is way too much on purpose, and it's like they straight up want you to go, what am I even looking at right now? What's cool is that a lot of these were actually hand-painted, and not drawn like the rest of the episode. Some of them look like legit oil paintings, meaning the artist have to sit there and draw every single frame of SpongeBob's crust and oils. Yeah, I really can't blame people for complaining to the creators now, though it's most likely done to get people talking about the show. You know, sometimes it's easy to forget that this was all hand-painted. I was never gonna sleep anyway. But then, SpongeBob released a video game on Nickelodeon's website, and it was something completely different from what people were used to seeing. About 99% of you are probably too young to have even played it, but let me explain. This was not the bright, detailed SpongeBob from the show. Instead, he looked incredibly low detail, almost like something you would expect from a computer game made in 1990. Everything had its pixelated, blocky look to it, yet somehow you could instantly tell it was SpongeBob, despite how simple it looked. The art style actually matched the resolution and the style of the early show surprisingly well for its time. The gameplay itself, though, was pretty basic, but in a charming way. What's crazy is that the game is actually still available to play today, if you search for it online on sites like itch.io. People love going back to play these games, not just for nostalgia, but because of how unique SpongeBob looked in them. It's almost hard to imagine if SpongeBob actually looked like this in the show. Chances are, a lot of people wouldn't have been as hooked, but in the form of a quick, simple, online game, it worked perfectly. Outdated or not, fans remember it, and it remains one of those weird little pieces of SpongeBob history. Speaking of outdated, a character that literally looked like SpongeBob from 1940, DoodleBob, was introduced. DoodleBob was one of the most popular variants of SpongeBob, being turned into memes and even being remade 18 years later in season 12. Aside from that, the Frankendoodle episode was actually a pretty genius idea. But now, let's look into the first major change. Around season 4, the animation style changed a lot. Since they took a break and worked on the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, obviously they had to come back absolutely cooking. When they released their first episode of season 4, it was obvious that this art style made the characters a lot glossier. Some fans even described some of the characters in the scenes as being rubbery or bouncy. This occurred because starting in season 4, SpongeBob switched fully to digital art. No more digital cell art. They drew everything using digital paintbrushes. Although many people thought this was going to change everything in the show for the better, it wasn't necessarily as great of a change as a lot of people say. The glossiness was actually just the saturation bleeding into people's eyes, and the bounciness was just a lean towards their way of being funny. Then after that, in 2007, SpongeBob went through another small change that polished up the characters even more and made things look even more fresh. The lighting was improved, giving certain scenes a natural look, and the underwater animations felt a tad bit smoother, and the backgrounds now had better gradients that made them look more vibrant and detailed. It wasn't a massive overhaul, but it was enough to give the show slightly more of a modern feel. This update was mostly worked on in the background, so it's kind of the thing that you might not have noticed unless you compared older episodes side by side with the newer one. Some fans picked up on it right away, pointing out that the colors had certain effects, like light rays underwater looked more polished. It was subtle, but it gave the show a small visual boost without changing the core style that people adored. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a groundbreaking change, but it did its job well. The brighter colors and improved gradients kept the show from looking outdated as animation advanced. It was simply one of those quiet changes that helped SpongeBob stay visually appealing while keeping the same feeling that it had since the very beginning. At the end of the day, it just modernized animation and kept it fresh looking, which you will see later in this video would backlash a lot. But nothing could top this next change. Even though it only appeared for 2 episodes, it was on a completely different level compared to anything they've ever done before. The crazy part is that it took the crew almost an entire year to make each one. A whole year just for one episode. And honestly, every second of work paid off, because It's a SpongeBob Christmas ended up being some of the most beloved episodes in the eyes of so many fans. People might rip the new SpongeBob seasons, but they can't deny that this was still absolutely spectacular. I remember wanting to watch this exact special every Christmas. Something about the animation just made it the best. And honestly, I think they can do some of this animation for certain episodes. That would be cool. And the wildest part is that the entire thing was made the old-fashioned way. No shortcuts, and no relying on the faster, more modern techniques that other companies were leaning on. Every shot was crafted with that hands-on, frame-by-frame approach that you rarely see anymore. It gave the whole thing this unique charm and authenticity that just hits different, and that's why people still talk about it years later. But while they used an older way to animate these episodes, that doesn't mean that they used an old way to record it, because as HD got introduced to the world, everything changed in animation. We got better pixels and brighter colors, and this led to better shows overall. So SpongeBob got with the times and decided to switch to HD, and I can't blame them. I wouldn't want to keep showing people a sponge in 360p and say that I graded that. Come on, season 9 episode 1 was the first of its kind, and it was the first ever episode to be fully in 1080p with a 16:9 aspect ratio. The episode overall had better visuals and brighter colors. This made everything about the show even better for both the viewers and the animators. The resolution made it more visually pleasing for the viewer, but also easier for the animators to add motion blur and other effects. Some fans loved it, and some fans hated it, and some described it as disturbing. After all, it was their first time seeing a normal SpongeBob episode in 1080p. It's like putting glasses on for the first time. Although some episodes after that were aired in 720p or 360p in a 1:1 aspect ratio, it wasn't the last 1080p episode, because as you'll see later in this video, things are about to get a whole lot crazier. After that, SpongeBob SquarePants had a major change in 2015. After the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, the show started getting a more cartoonish and exaggerated animation style. This made it look more squishy and stretchy than before, giving it a more cartoonish vibe, and making it more appealing and interesting. But around the same time, things took a bit of a strange turn. SpongeBob SquarePants just started season 9 with its first episode, and suddenly, people were pointing out that something felt different, and it wasn't the big HD upgrade that we talked about earlier. Some swore the characters were blinking more often. Others thought proportions looked a little off. And a few even said everything seemed kind of jiggly. Yeah, I know, it sounds absolutely vile, but that's what they said, not me. Still, once you get past the weird observations and finally grow up, these actual changes were pretty neat. They leaned into a more exaggerated and cartoonish style, which gave the animation a bit more energy and personality. It wasn't creepy or unsettling, just a lot more active. Faces stretched out a little further when characters reacted, movements felt looser, and the whole thing had a nice bounce to it that gave the scenes a lot more action. And it only gets crazier when SpongeBob makes such a small change that only affects SpongeBob's pores. Pretty much, starting at around season 12, they did this subtle texture boost, which made certain shots look a little bit cleaner. What's interesting is how this was all achieved with layered brushes, which sounds super technical for something that ends up being so small, but it just goes to show how much effort gets put into even the tiniest details in animation. It's obvious they care enough to tweak and improve things when longtime viewers won't catch it. And sure, maybe it's not groundbreaking, but it adds up. But this next change is straight up diabolical. You see, the people behind SpongeBob had supposedly been cooking behind the scenes to make a huge overhaul for the upcoming movie. But instead of making a good change, they literally decided to change the entire animation style by going from a nostalgic 2D drawn style that they've kept for over 2 decades to going to this. And literally everyone hated it. And no, I'm not talking about Sponge Out of Water. I'm talking about the horribly animated CGI 3D animated SpongeBob from Sponge on the Run. I mean, just imagine someone who watches SpongeBob every day back in 2010, gets into a coma, and then wakes up to see this. That would be crazy. This 3D version of SpongeBob looks really different compared to his normal style. His body has this really smooth texture, which makes him have no charm at all, making his skin look like a literal rubber duck that you'd give to a toddler. This version of SpongeBob was just focused on being as corporate as possible. In 2D, his expressions can go crazy, but in 3D, it just falls flat. Bikini Bottom in 3D is super detailed, but it feels like it has no personality whatsoever. The show's style always had this energy where the animation looked so undetailed that it made it 10 times more fun to watch, but this one feels way more forced, like it's trying way too hard to be absolutely pixel perfect. A lot of the humor in SpongeBob comes from how weird the characters look, and in this style, that just does not happen the way we're used to. It's not the worst thing ever, but it really does not have the same personality that people loved about SpongeBob. With all these changes, obviously, SpongeBob will never be seen the same again. Some people were starting to kind of give up on SpongeBob. It wasn't really a cartoon anymore. It was kind of just a bland corporation. Instead of trying to make kids laugh, it was just SpongeBob. There was nothing special about the show anymore, just another cartoon. But somehow, in some way, they managed to prove us wrong. SpongeBob SquarePants decided to hit the rewind button. So around seasons 14 and 15, SpongeBob SquarePants did something about it. They ever so slightly went back to their old style. Not a full-on throwback to season 5, but definitely some clear nods to the early 2010 style that a lot of fans really loved. It was like the show was taking a deep breath after years of being way too modernized and trying to find a balance again. One of the most drastic things you'll notice is how the lines around the characters got thicker. It's like they wanted everything to feel more hand-drawn, like the Cell style we talked about earlier. Honestly, it made the whole thing feel a lot more personal and like it had soul, less like it was made by a random digital app. The characters also stopped bouncing and stretching so much, and the effects were toned way down. Now, all the characters move way more natural, like they're actually living underwater, living in Bikini Bottom. Their facial expressions also changed a bit. Instead of constantly changing every frame into some weird face, the characters would hold on to an expression for longer. It gave you, as the viewer, some time to actually breathe and take in the mushy pores on SpongeBob's face. Ew. Anyways, the overall tone of the show got completely slowed down a bit. It wasn't this non-stop corporation trying to get viral anymore. The new style felt like a break from all that. Like the show was remembering why it was so great in the first place. Fun characters, simple jokes, and a Bikini Bottom that actually felt real for once. Even though they were still using digital animation, it's not like it was much different from the old style. And this wasn't just about how the characters looked. It changed the whole feel of the show. Bikini Bottom stopped feeling like some crazy meme whirlwind and got some of its heart back. The characters felt more real again, and the stories had a better flow. Even after all these years, SpongeBob showed it could still surprise us, not by going bigger or being louder, but by remembering what made it awesome to begin with. We got what we wanted, old SpongeBob, and it all goes full circle, kind of.